impact on the way to do business, the way to do processing. So we're going to be talking about RPA specifically in higher education today, and it's about, as we say here, the why, what, and how. As you're all fully aware, higher education's been feeling the financial squeeze for a number of years, and the recent pandemic has only added to that. And in fact, if anything, like in private industry and private sector, a lot of the trends we already saw happening are likely to be accelerated by COVID-19. And RPA is definitely one of those, as organizations look to leverage new technologies to help with their processing, productivity, efficiency, and actually improving the way they can deliver in the case of higher education, academics and research. So this workshop will dive into RPA, what it is, and implementation, and give some case studies. And the topics we'll be talking about is, firstly, what exactly is robotic process automation, and what can it offer for higher education. We'll be talking through some potential processes that were relevant for RPA, specifically within higher education. We'll be charting a plan, showing you sort of end-to-end how you move from a pilot through vendor selection, your business case, roadmap, and onto actual development of bots and deployment of those bots. We'll talk briefly about some of the challenges you might face and how to potentially overcome them, some of the implementations, lessons learned that we've learned with our clients in higher education and more broadly in private sector. And then we have a couple of case studies at the end and a bit of a live demo for you towards the end. As we move through the sections, if you have any questions, please let us know. We'll probably sort of pause every now and then through this presentation and ask if you have any questions, or we can take them at the end, just depending on time. I know we have approximately an hour for this session. Okay, thanks, Joey. So as I mentioned, my name's Phil Searle. I'm the CEO of Chasey Partners. I've been around a while, but working in previously in operational roles. I was the corporate controller at a company called 3Com. Listening to Kathleen talking about 1985 made me smile a little bit, but I was at 3Com in the late 90s and early 2000s when we went through the dot-com boom bust, for those of you that remember that. Actually, Palm was also, if you remember that, handheld device was part of the 3Com business. Anyway, I was controller there, then I moved on to be CFO of one of their Ascendant business units, and in a number of different roles, I've led organizational business transformations, including shared services and technology. And then in 2006, I left what I called corporate America and set up Chasey Partners. We've done a lot of work in higher education over the years, and we're looking to bring that experience today. Chewy's been with the company for a year or two now, and we've known each other for 2 to 3 years, and he will introduce himself when he gets to his section shortly. Thanks, Chewy. Okay, so just briefly on the company, I mentioned it's founded in 2006, headquartered in California. I'm actually based in the San Jose area. The office here is in Campbell, so in the Bay Area. We provide sort of 3 main tiers of services, what I call traditional end-to-end shared services, robotic process automation, which I've mentioned, and then broader business transformation, which can include technology enablement, mergers and acquisitions, business continuity planning, and the like. We focus mainly on the back office, but I will say that as we move into RPA is becoming more and more relevant to the front office as the whole combination of support services starts to combine into what you may have heard as a trend called the one office, where sort of actually in the a few years back and not that long ago, it was almost like back office processing was sort of needed to be out of sight, out of mind, offshored, maybe even outsourced. But that's not so true anymore as businesses and organizations and institutions are using data and information much more effectively. The whole integration between the back office and the front office is become more and more important. Doesn't mean there's still not an operating model and separation of roles and responsibilities, but they are more interlinked, and RPA is actually one of the examples and outcomes and contributors to that trend. All right, Chewy. Just quickly on, these are some of our example clients. On the left-hand side, you see our higher education experience. We've done a lot of work in the University of California system, for example. We've also done some work with the University of Iowa state system, Claremont University Consortium, and a few other higher education bodies. We've done a lot of work in public sector for the city of Santa Ana and the federal government, US federal government, and up in Canada. And in the middle, you have a sort of private sector multinational experience. And on the right-hand side, we do a lot of work in Latin America. All right, Chewy, thank you. All right. So now to move into the core of our presentation workshop today. So what exactly is robotic process automation? We'll be talking about that in a second, and then we'll move through candidate processes, implementation challenges, and case studies. So, okay, thanks, Chewy. Okay, so what is RPA? At a sort of high level, RPA, robotic process automation, means the application of this sort of specific technology that enables computer software to partially or fully automate human activities that are generally manual, repetitive, and rules-based. So keep that in mind. Generally manual, repetitive, and rules-based. It's about the application of software to processes to automate human activities. So think about those. It's almost, as it describes in the description, it's process automation done robotically, as if it was done. So it's mimicking human activity, but doing it through a software. It is not about shiny robots, as it says on the box, top left box here. It is about software. So it's not about hardware robotics, it's software robotics. So when you think of manufacturing operations, or maybe even Amazon, you think of the robots moving around up and down aisles, etc. That's not what we're talking about here. We are talking about software, although of course there is a link between software and hardware in some of those elements of technology. Again, in top right, RPA software can mimic or fully automate routine, rules-based tasks normally performed by a human who is interacting with a system or processes. So RPA often works at the user interface level. That's the key point here. Bots interpret, trigger responses, and communicate with other systems in order to perform a vast variety of generally repetitive tasks. And a really important point is that bots can transact in any IT application or website in just the same way as a human would, click by click, once trained on what steps to follow. So again, when you think about a human interacting with tools and softwares and sitting at a desk, we often call this swivel desk activities, almost moving from one computer screen to another, extracting data from one, sorting, sending a report to another, analyzing, receiving inputs, and then sending back out and sharing information on a periodic basis. Is a very good application for any RPA tool. And so that's what we talk here. Another thing is when you get into interaction with ERP systems, we often talk about RPA almost having to have its own sort of license. Now, licensing is another topic we're not going to get into today with ERP, because that depends on your own circumstances. But it's about thinking about the bot taking on human activity. And we sometimes call it a hybrid workforce, where you have a person working alongside a bot, sometimes on the actual desktop, which tends to be called robotic desktop automation, or sometimes on a sort of broader server with multiple people, which tends to be more robotic process automation. You may have heard this sort of trend called hyper-automation, of which RPA is a component. I'll come back to explain that in a little bit more detail. But basically, hyper-automation is not just about robotic process automation. It's about increasingly intelligent cognitive machine learning type tools that learn, adapt, and work with more unstructured data across more complex processes. So RPA is sort of on the left-hand side of that. We'll show a picture in a second. But hyper-automation is regarded as, by Gartner as an example, as one of the top 10 strategic technology trends for 2020. In fact, the #1 for 2020. Okay, so where does RPA fit into hyper-automation? So I've touched on a couple of these, but some of the other components of hyper-automation you may have heard about include artificial intelligence, machine learning, business process management, native integrations between tools, process mining, which you may have heard a lot about recently, and advanced analytics. They're all part of the toolkit of hyper-automation, and RPA is a big side component and integrated part of that hyper-automation trends. Again, it's a mix of automation technologies, business analytics, and artificial intelligence that, again, is used to augment human capabilities, allowing humans to take on more value-adding activities. And within this structure, you may have heard about a center of excellence or a center of expertise to hyper-automation journeys. While we're not specifically talking about that in a great deal today. How you organize your operating model and your governance structures around implementing RPA in any institution is also important, and that's where a COE can potentially come into play. Okay. Okay, so who are some of the key players out there in the software world? So there's a couple of fairly recent sources, both 2020. On the left-hand side, you have a Gartner map, and on the right-hand side, you have an Everest map. It's usually, as often with these sort of charts, it's top right where you see the main players. So on the left-hand side, you see UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, WorkFusion, and in the, slightly below that, Microsoft and Pegasystems. Microsoft is really getting into this area. For example, they actually had some of their sort of similar own tools, but now they fairly recently, a few months back, bought Softomotive, which produces Win Automation. So Microsoft is really becoming a leader in this space as well. No surprise really there. On the right-hand side, you see, again, the main players, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism. You actually see Softomotive mentioned on, sorry, Chewy, can you go back? Yeah, you can see Softomotive mentioned on here rather than Microsoft, but it's part of the same sort of the same group of tools. And then there are a number of others on here. So whenever you're looking into RPA, clearly you're going to be looking at the tools out there. UiPath is generally seen as the main player, with Automation Anywhere pretty close. But there are lots of other possibilities there as well. So what are some of the benefits of RPA? Well, these bots, as I've mentioned already, transact in any IT application or website, typically in the same way a human would, to automate complex rule-based works. So what are the potential benefits from that? Well, one absolutely is speed and productivity. RPA itself is typically 2 to 3 times faster than a human, and actually within a specific subset of activities, it can be tens of times quicker. And we're actually going to be showing that in our case study later on during this workshop. But, you know, as a general rule, across a process, 2 to 3 times faster. Robots as well can also work around the clock 24/7. So they can be run, for example, overnight. They can run in the background, etc., which helps speed and productivity. Accuracy and compliance, subject to, and this subject to is important, subject to appropriate maintenance and testing of bots and adaptation to changes in infrastructure. All very important points I just made there as a subtext, but subject to that, robots work 100% accuracy at accuracy levels and enable full compliance to whatever compliance regulations and rules you have in place, which of course avoids human error to a large degree, and which itself can save cost and time. Robots can be scaled up and down to handle different demand fluctuations and seasonal variations. In fact, robots can be moved from one task to another fairly seamlessly with a bit of maintenance and structuring. So they can do one set of activities maybe during a set hours, another set of activities during another set of hours, or they can be moved to one set of activities during a week and another week, and then seasonal as well. So it's fairly scalable and flexible. And one of the main benefits of RPA, without linkage with the human workforce, is the removal of non-value add processes, so that the people can use their knowledge and value-adding activities to aid decision-making and do the parts of the role that most people really want to do, rather than necessarily the more routine tasks. And ultimately, if implemented properly as part of a proper strategy, it can reduce the cost of service by automating what we call FTE of activity, and that can reduce the cost to provide service. Okay. Turning specifically more to higher education. So higher education, obviously RPA can be, again, leveraged to apply to automate processes delivered by functions which can redirect time, effort, funding, resources to supporting teaching, researching, and other activities underpinning the core mission of your institution. Again, it can work 24/7 with limited IT oversight, which is an important point. You absolutely need to work with your IT organization, but it's not as complex and as heavy as structured as, for example, implementing a new ERP or a single point technology solution, because the interface tools and integration tools and the GUI interfaces are relatively simple, But again, not to say you don't do this in partnership with your IT organization. You absolutely do, because you need to take into account security, access, infrastructure, licensing, etc. But it is relatively more straightforward than some of the legacy tools. So that there we talk about ease of implementation, generally light touch with underlying systems undisturbed, fairly easy to program, fairly easy. It's not as simple as some as the vendors make out, but it's fairly more straightforward. This can improve student and staff experience. It can, as I mentioned, lower costs, produce a higher ROI. It can improve job quality for faculty and staff. It can run workforce availability 24/7. It can reduce errors. It can switch between tasks. It can save money, and it can reduce labor hours. So many of the benefits I just mentioned also apply to RPA. We're going to get a little bit more specific about higher education as we go through the presentation. Thank you, Chewy. So at this point, I'm going to pause to ask if there's any questions on the definitions we've just mentioned, which we'll take. If there aren't, I'll hand over to Chewy. But let's just pause for a second and see if there's any comments or questions before we move on. Okay, Chewy, I think it's over to you.
Thank you, Phil. And as Phil mentioned, I'm Chewy Michel. I'm the head of RPA at Chasey Partners. Been in the shared service industry for over 20 years. Also was part of high-tech companies for at least 15 years. And over the last 6 years, I've been around automation, call it many different ways. I started many years ago with scripting, then desktop automation, more recently, robotics process automation, and as Phil mentioned, new trending topics such as hyper-automation, including new technologies such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so forth. Let me quickly go through what can be automated. So when we look at automation, the first thing that we need to think about is processes, right? And not technology. So this all starts with a process evaluation or process assessment. And there are key elements and key criteria that need to be considered before jumping into an actual automation program. So what can be automated using RPA? Robotics process automation is increasing the leverage by higher education to develop more modern and sophisticated administrative operations. As Phil explained, RPA operates like a virtual employee or a virtual assistant, performing high volume tasks and processes that result in higher efficiency and quality improvement. Typically, 60% of an organization processes can be somehow automated using RPA. And as you can see in this chart, when you look at candidates and future automations, you need to think about highly manual and repetitive processes. It is important that those processes have clear business rules that have few exceptions. And if there are exceptions, that exceptions are properly documented or identified. Of course, when you launch your automation program, it is important to start with low complexity, quick wins, and that it's related to identifying processes where most of your inputs are electronic. Obviously, you want to look at high volume processes, and you want to look at both systems and processes that are mature and that are stable. So in back office processes, which is vital, right? So back office is vital to running a business, and can create a differentiation across multiple towers, such as IT, human resources, and finance. For example, accounts payable departments, normally they don't have enough resources to process new volumes, right? And organizations that are moving towards automation have been able to capture opportunities where 70% of the invoices are received electronically and then processed via workflow, which is your bot. And with the use of this digital assistant and with the use of, specific tasks that are automated by a bot, a single accounts payable assistant can process up to 20,000 invoices a year. Another example that you can find here is accounts receivable, right? Accounts receivable is critical to running a business, but many times accounts receivable is filled with time-consuming activities and boring activities. And although this accounts receivable function is different company to company, there are many areas where automation can create an impact to the organization, such as order processing, order fulfillment, invoicing, cash applications. So by automatically capturing information as this flowing into the team and keying that information into the systems or into the ERP, and doing this in an automated fashion using bots, organization can reduce cycle time, can improve quality, and increase productivity at the end. At the same time, right, if you look at this from an HR perspective, which we have an example that we're going to share with you later on. So from an HR perspective, employee onboarding is a great example, right? So tasks such as filling out forms, sending out notifications, populating different systems with employee information can be successfully handled by bots. At the same time, it's not only that you are removing tedious activity from your workflow, but at the end of the day, bots tend to have less errors than humans, right? And as a result of this, as Steve already mentioned, your HR partners can focus on strategic activities instead of just moving paperwork back and forth. Information technology, which is at the end, right, here, it's not the exception, right? So you can identify opportunities with high potential for automate, and basically your IT service desk, where you manage service requests, incident management, problem management, change management, is an area where you typically can identify opportunities for automation. So let me move to the next chart here. Bear with me. Oops. So we decided to include, right, in the topic of higher education, some specific use cases, right, that have to do with your end-to-end processes, such as from an admission perspective, student fees, reconciliation, assessment, and project feedback. From an academic standpoint, the overall administration, student retention, the analysis of attendance, report cards, and we just mentioned that, right? From a back office perspective, there are a number of opportunities. As I mentioned, 60% of your mundane tasks across order to cash, record to report, procure to pay can and should be automated at the end. Other specific processes such as registration, research grants, and processing of students' applications. So automations and students, right? The student world, the professional world. As a student, there's a big opportunity to increase the usage and utilization of RPA. So as I mentioned before the word, RPA can become the digital assistant of students, can help students to consolidate financial aid search, supercharge group products, automate job searches, create note cards, save time when you are prepping for a presentation or for a class, and do research quicker, faster, more effectively. In the workforce, students will work alongside with automation. Students are graduating in a world with disparate systems, and they don't talk to each other. And for a decade, they can operate with more friction than necessary. So at the end, more and more universities we're seeing are adding RPA as one class, and more big companies like UiPath are giving away what they call community licenses, free licenses to students so they can learn from RPA and also start using RPA to make their lives easier and create their own automations. This is one case, right? The one that I was referring to, Raymond A. Mason School of Business, where they have provided automation software to undergraduate business students, approximately 400 students. They have now their own licenses and they are creating their own automation. And what they want to do is really motivate, right? Motivate students and spark entrepreneurial mindset in the students. Now I'm gonna move to how to deploy a proper automation roadmap. But before I do that, I just want to open up for questions or comments at this point.
If anyone has a question, you can unmute your mic and ask, or you can send it through the chat box.
Or if anybody has any questions afterwards you'd like us to answer, we're very happy to do that. So if you can send the questions either to the organizers or directly to us, we're very happy to answer any questions or follow up afterwards. We're pleased to do that. The only other comment, Chewy, while we're just moving between sections, one of the things we found in our own research in higher education over the years is actually that the spend on technology, when you compare with the private sector, has not been an issue. In other words, there hasn't been an underspend on technology in higher education. But what's been one of the biggest issues is the fact that it's not being done in an integrated, consistent way across institutions. So what that means is you've got a lot of islands of technology. Some are very good on a standalone basis, but they don't integrate, or they're not scaled or leveraged across other parts of the institution. And there's often handoffs which are very manual. Again, this is where RPA potentially can offer a big benefit in moving between applications and human activity. And it's a massive opportunity for higher education. If you guys don't come out of one thing, it's to say, please take the time to look at this new technology as part of the hyper-automation trend, because the opportunity, if done properly in higher education, is huge. And in the private sector is really scaling this, really scaling. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, you probably heard about 2 or 3 bots in sort of pilots. Now we're talking about, dozens to hundreds of bots operating through a COE structure. So I just would implore higher education to really look at this and see how it can be leveraged in the future.
Thank you, Phil. And just as Phil mentioned, right, it's not about just automating a couple of tasks and creating a few automations. It's how do you move your RPA program from being just a tactical project into becoming really a strategic one. So RPA is not the answer to everything, right? But if you want to scale it, it will require formal structure. It will require governance. So partnering with IT, as Phil mentioned, it's key to moving forward. Business cases, what's going to be the increased productivity, the increased quality versus your investment. And of course, looking at this, and I'll talk to it a little bit later, right? It's creating an automation roadmap. So a multi-year automation roadmap that can help you to put in perspective a larger business case, and can help you put in perspective across different business processes, what is the value that can be achieved. So
again, Chewy, sorry, just to jump in here for a second. So this comment about firing out all over the place is what we mean by that is, and Chewy's mentioned this, it's not a nirvana answer to everything. So you don't want to implement RPA everywhere if you can actually improve the process. But the counter to that is, don't be drawn into we've got a new technology coming on in the next few years that will replace that. The return on investment for these tools is far more rapid than some of the broader, bigger technologies. And therefore you can almost, to some degree, have focused but knowing throwaway work that can automate manual processes in the short to medium term, before you may get some solution that fixes it in the longer term. So it needs to be part of a roadmap that Chewy is going to talk about, but it's also much more flexible and scalable and used. And again, don't be afraid of throwaway, because these tools are very, very powerful in automating manual processes in the short term.
Phil, that's a great point. Actually, what you're actually describing is RPA as a technology. It's not intrusive, right? And it doesn't require large investments in hardware, right? So in many cases, when you're going and deploying something like an ERP, a CRM, a TMS, there's always large hardware components. There's always new databases that need to be created. There's always new interfaces that need to be created. And when you think about RPA, forget about large investments in hardware, forget about new interfaces, and forget about new databases. Because RPA as a technology, and Phil mentioned in the description, is mimicking the activities of a human being. So it'll use the same screen, it'll use the same steps that an analyst uses today in order to execute certain tasks and operations.
And actually,
you mentioned, right?
Yeah, and Chewy, on that, we sometimes get asked a question, and I will stop talking in a second, let Chewy get back to it. But one thing we get asked a lot is, hey, isn't this just scripting and macros? Well, to some degree, it's similar, but the answer is definitely not yes. That's a way too simplistic an answer. In a way, it acts similar to scripting and macros, but because RPA is autonomous of the application and operates at the object layer, it's very different. And so it's therefore far more scalable, far more interactive, far more useful from a user perspective, and it can interact with all sorts of platforms and operating systems. So that's very important. It can be scaled very quickly, unlike scripting and macros. It also, RPA implemented properly, has orchestration capabilities. You can schedule them. You can interact more closely between humans and RPA. They can be trained and developed. They can interface with some of these other technologies like AI and machine learning I mentioned. So when you hear the comment, isn't it just scripting or macros? In a way, it performs similar-ish, but it's fundamentally different in the way how it does that and the opportunities to scale, train, and develop. So I just wanted to add that comment in. Okay.
Yeah, scale it and orchestrate it, right? Because you mentioned it's not only about scaling like crazy. It's also about how certain tasks will run over the weekend, certain tasks, certain operations will be performed overnight. Certain operations are needed very early in the morning, so analysts have the right information in front of them when they go online. So different aspects about scalability, right? About controlling your automation that are important. And I promise this is my last comment, but typically when automation is done right, your return on investment is no longer than 9 months. So typically your return on investment would be doing properly. You will achieve the payback within the same year. So this is how Chasey looks at RPA, end to end, right? So it's not about only developing bots. It's also looking at this at a process level. And as shared services practitioners, you all know that looking at processes, controlling processes, standardizing processes is critical. Creating the right control points is critical. So when we look at automation, we always look at it from a process perspective. Proof of concept is very important, right? How do you learn about RPA? Go for a proof of concept. Once you want to scale up, center of excellence, it's critical to create this control environment for growth. Bot development needs to be part of it, and managed services, which is your maintenance and support after your bots are in production. So process durability, automation strategy, business case. We at Chasey, we have a very powerful tool. I'll show you screenshots, I guess, in the next chart. We have developed very powerful tools that we have embedded in our process, in our assessment. And we built a number of algorithms using qualitative and quantitative data. So we can provide a diagnosis, right? And determine the viability of an automation, as well as the complexity of the project in itself, along with your return on investment or your expected return on investment. this is a key input, right? Not all the ideas for automation are going to become a good automation, right? Why? Due to complexity. I just talked about it, right? Due to data structure, due to business rules, due to system instability. So what this tool basically does at the process suitability level is that allows you to discard those ideas that are not yet, should not be yet in your roadmap, and allows you to capture your quick wins and your best opportunities for automation. And this is key, right? This is key to create your automation roadmap. Now going to, and this is the example that I was showing to you. So when we go and work in a project, we typically work with subject matter experts to understand at a high level the walkthrough of the process. But then after that high level process overview, we go through a number of questions and assessments. And as I mentioned, right, this is quantitative, right? Even though you embed qualitative inputs to it, at the end of the day, it's a number, right? It's an algorithm that gives you a number, and you can see here, right, in your right screen, that within this figure, right, it's where you want your first set of automations to be, because that's a low-hanging fruit, that's your quick wins, that's your lower to medium complexity and quick return on investment project. Moving to proof of concept, right? I guess I mentioned, right? Proof of concept is critical. It's as we usually say, right? Show me the money, right? So a POC is that, right? It's a contained process suitability assessment. I just mentioned process suitability. You look at 3 to 5 processes. We use Chase's RPA tool, and then we recommend the most viable options, right? So we create a five assessments. We prioritize them based on complexity, based on viability. And then you find your, as I said, like quick wins. You identify your low-hanging fruit, and then you start getting credibility to the business because you move that proof of concept to production. So it's not actually a proof of concept playing with dummy data. It's actually a proof of concept with real data, tested, moved to production, hyper-cured, so you can follow up on the performance in production of the bot, and then showing to the business the value of automation. So then you can, again, get more investment in your RPA program. And when we say start growing, right? How do you scale your program? How do you scale it in a controlled fashion? How do you scale it identifying opportunities in the business? Looking at not so traditional business processes, deep diving in HR, deep diving in finance and accounting, deep diving in IT, to identify opportunities, but that's moving to front office, right? To deploy, identify opportunities, and create automation. So a COE is not actually a prerequisite to launch an RPA program. As we said, you can start with a proof of concept, but if you really want to accelerate it and you want to scale it, you must create a central governance body, right? And COE is not just a group of developers. It's a combination of many things, right? It's a combination of the right skills in the people, processes, technology, and helping organizations and empowering organizations to accelerate the time to value to RPA, identifying the opportunities across the different areas. So it's not about technology only, right? Your COE must have processes and business skills. And if done right, your RPA program, along with your COE, can become and should become a core component of a digital transformation of any given organization. And a COE eventually becomes your evangelist, your catalyst of automation. And we at Chasey, we have more than, as Phil mentioned, right? We have 15 years of experience building centers at a larger scale service centers. And over the last 6 years, we've embedded many of those best practices to set up, to design and implement COEs. And that has happened over the last six years. Development is very important. And again, right, you have to look at it from a process perspective, right? And what I mean with that if you don't have the right process documentation, if you don't have the right process flow, the identification of your exceptions, the identification of your decisions in your workflow, your automation most likely will fail. So the process work is super important before jumping into real development. We use a 6-step approach at Chasey to ensure the best quality of the automation across multiple software platforms. And as I mentioned, right, we at Chasey, we like to see it beyond technology only. We are very focused on the proper process assessment, extensive diagnosis of potential automation, design of the process. So you design a proper process with the right workflows, with the right documentation, so you can then move to designing the solutions, which is normally known as SDDs. This upfront process is very important, right? It's very important. It's gonna increase the opportunity for automation to be successful. Last but not least, right? It's your managed services or maintenance and support offering. So your automation is up and running, right? It's in production, but what happens when your bot fails for no apparent reason? So Chasey has put together a very robust service program feature that provides dedicated account management, bot support with a toll-free access, preventive support, best practices, proactive care. We perform root cause analysis for those things. We fix the things, right? We troubleshoot. We turn it off. We turn it on. We identify where the bug is. We prioritize, so we focus on the high priority cases. So this accelerates response time and provides your ongoing monitoring of bot performance. Automation roadmap, right? Last but not least, right? It's you have to look at this end-to-end. Discovery is critical. Your proof of concept is critical. Identifying stakeholders, right? So identifying in the organization the right stakeholders becomes critical to success. I mentioned proof of concept, but show me the money. Go and prove what automation can do for an organization. Don't forget about measuring, right? So identifying qualitative, quantitative benefits and tracking those becomes increasingly important. So we're gonna move now to overcoming challenges and lessons learned. But before we do that, and I'll turn it over to Phil, I want again, right, open up for questions in the team. So Phil, I guess, unless you wanna make a final comment on the automation roadmap. Okay, I guess you have a question
for you. Yeah, I do. Thanks, Phil and Chewy. Just around the discussion of just maintenance of the bots, like once you get through and kind of establish, the appropriate bot and functionality of it, who's actually responsible or is now the owner of the actual bot? And in the event that a process changes, who, is it the owner? In this case, the institution that's responsible for modifying the bot, or is that when Chasey comes back in and, helps make the necessary adjustments?
I don't know if you want to go first, Chewy. I mean, I've got some comments, but you go first as the, yeah, you go first.
It's both, right? When we typically sell a bot, right, we provide maintenance for a given period of time, right? So this troubleshooting and hypercare and fixing small things, we take care of it, right? We also have a standalone offering for managed services where we did or we didn't develop the bot, but you need some sort of a maintenance and support policy, right? That is typically annual, right? There are different service levels, right? Different prices, of course. And there are other type of changes, right? So there are changes where your process is the same, your systems are the same, but your bot fails. And there are cases where a screen changed, an upgrade in a system, a new version of something where your bot is gonna fail, and there's some development work that is needed, right? And it all depends on the strategy, right? So organizations typically outsource support and maintenance. Some organizations decided to perform the services in-house. So it depends on the strategy, right? But
yeah, so
we have both offers.
So yeah, exactly. So often organizations will outsource it initially and then bring it in-house as part of the COE structure. But just to extend the answer to your question, who owns it? So if there's a change in process, the process owner should inform the COE or the whoever's the interface, that usually internally, and they would bring us in if we provide maintenance and support. Okay, but the process owners, you support that. This is where IT is also critical, because if you get a change in operating system or anything that can break, it's called breaking a bot, right? Then there should be, so there needs to be good communication. To your question is very, very important. So these bots aren't one-time deal done. They absolutely need to be maintained, which is the crux of your question. So you need to have a governance structure set up between the process owner, IT, and the RPA bot development team, whether that be a COE or not. And there needs to be a maintenance component to that, which often is outsourced, as Chewy mentioned, and we provide that service. But over time, some of our clients have actually brought that into expertise in-house and taken it, run with it themselves. Does that answer the question?
Yep, gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so let's keep moving. I know.
Phil?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Yes.
Sorry, this is Whitney at Utah State.
Hi, Whitney.
So a year or two ago, I returned from one of your from one of the conferences, and after listening to one of your presentations, and met with my IT director to discuss RPA and ask him about it. And he's really good, by the way. They do a lot of incredible things, but I was pretty underwhelmed by his response. He really didn't know much about it, and I know he's not really in the financial services type industry in higher ed. But is it a surprise to you that an IT professional wouldn't really be well versed in RPA and know that it's kind of coming down the tracks, and especially for higher ed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, I sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, Whitney, in my comments. I would say 3 to 4 years ago, that was prevalent in private sector everywhere, right? Often IT would be almost dismissive of it. And I get that. To be fair, I get it. I actually made it in one of my opening comments. Is this just another one of those new trends, which is, but no, it's so it's really it's keep pushing the message, and you have to bring IT in, right? And you have to do it through these sort of events and education and brought buy-in. So that engagement with IT is absolutely happening in the private sector now. Higher education is to your point, is still behind, right? But there are examples of growing. So we need to keep trying to bring the IT team in and educate. The danger is, and this happened in the private sector, is the private sector, the non-IT parts of the organization go, we're going to do it anyway, right? And to be fair, you don't actually need IT to do a pilot. You don't need IT to do a pilot. So you get functions in the private sector that say finance or HR or procurement or somebody. Actually, in financial services is a big deal, as you've probably seen with all the applications of PPP loans, for example, is a big deal in RPA. So you get them doing it anyway, but that's okay. But then when you try to scale, then you hit your roadblock. So to answer your question, Whitney, no, it's not a surprise. You got to keep moving. You can do pilots outside of IT to prove it. You can bring in experience from outside. You can show examples. You got to keep at it, Whitney, but it's not a surprise. Whatever.
Well, I agree with all of that. Plus, we know, right? We know from our experience and our global development team that in order to become an RPA developer, many times you don't need to have an IT background.
Yeah.
Many engineers, non-IT, they became great RPA developers due to the user-friendly interface, due to the logic, right? Due to the object, and as you said, you're right. Many organizations without involving IT, they decide to go from a proof of concept, and then as they get the results from the proof of concept, they go back to IT just to explain what the technology does, and then ask for help so you can scale.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Whitney. Phil, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, funny, hey, right. So what are some of the challenges and lessons learned from working in higher education specifically? And by the way, some of these apply to private sectors again. So the first up, a lack of understanding of what RPA is and what benefits it can bring. And to some degree, to Whitney's question, almost sort of and again, I suffered from it myself 5 years, almost an arrogance about, oh, come on, what is it really? Is it really that good? So that is a challenge. And we just talked a little bit about that and how you can address that through education, examples, proofs of concept that Chewy just mentioned, which can be done in a limited scale and approve it to your institution. And then again, you need to engage IT to scale it from there. Within higher education, RPA can be regarded as a private sector strategy and not practical for higher education. Again, that's the same. That's a big part of change management. That's absolutely not true, because it really is. It's just automating process through software. Why that would be unique to private sector, it's not. There can be a pushback to introducing a new third-party technology and introducing new sort of tools. That's true in private sector, public sector. We've talked about that, and again, it's through education and the fact it operates at the application layer. It doesn't upset the native application tools. But to be fair, again, you can't do this as you scale without IT. You need infrastructure, technology, support, security, and access. Right? You need all of those things. Maintenance that you've touched on, but it's not about implementing a new ERP solution. It's not like that. It's far more flexible. There can be a native resistance automating any human activity, which again is a change management question, and actually can be more prevalent in higher education / public sector than in private sector because of the nature of the activities. But that's not different to, quite frankly, any business process improvement tool that potentially automates or improves productivity. It's about selling the benefit to the institution and to the individuals. And a lack of investment dollars, like any change, especially in the current environment, we talk about that. I mean, you need a proper business case. You need to show a quick payback, which it does have, and you need to show the maybe a reallocation of budget. So some of the other things we recommend in that space. So we've touched on this a little bit on the right-hand side. You see implementation should be part of a strategy with planning, engagement, and stakeholders, like any strategy. Although the only thing we'd touch on, and Chewy mentioned it again, is, look, if you're not getting any traction, try a proof of concept. Try that. Good, Chewy. All right, the final section is on a couple of case studies. I'm going to talk about the first one, and then Chewy's going to take it from there. So the first one is actually University of California. Oh, this is, can you go to the UC Path one first, Chewy, and we'll go back to UC, because kind of virtually.
I don't know where I left it. Oh, I apologize.
Okay, it's probably been removed. Let me talk to it then. So at the UC Path Center, which for those of you that don't know UC Path, it's part of the University of California move forward with implementing PeopleSoft and a shared services model for running payroll and some benefits and some general accounting elements of that. Administration University of California. We were engaged as part of that move forward, and we implemented three different bots to support that. And one was to automate W-2s, another was to automate manual pay stubs, and another was to automate the reconciliation process. And so we'd be very happy to share with you offline some of the examples of those bots and how they were used to improve things. But some of the metrics on there, we improved the speed of processing by up to 20 times for the University of UC Path Center. And it was usually involving about 5 to 6 FTEs per element of that W-2 reconciliation, manual pay stub, or automated reconciliation. Those were the 3 main bots we did there. And so it freed up a significant amount of time that enabled the engine room within UC Path to then focus on other activities associated with payroll and benefits. And so the goal for UC Path Center going forward is to build its own COE and then scale, as we've talked about from there. So that was a really good case study we've helped with at the University of California Path Center down in Riverside. With that, I'll hand it to Chewy.
Sorry, Phil, for moving the chart, but I didn't realize I owe it to you. So UC Berkeley, right? This is another successful case where we engage with higher education, and this is very specific to HR in launching RPA for many of their processes, and that includes sourcing the software, installing the software, configuring the software using a technology called Win Automation. Phil mentioned before, this company was recently acquired by Microsoft. We also conducted a process suitability assessment where we identified candidate processes for RPA, as well as other opportunities for transformation. You know, I've said it many times, but proper process assessment, proper process diagnosis, proper process documentation, critical to success. And then we bounced it, right, with University of California, UC Berkeley, operating models, right? We just talked about COEs. Some of them are, you know, COEs light, but, you know, talking about operating models is critical, right? So what's in production? There's three. It's the new hire bot, additional jobs bot, salary changes bot. This one saves up to 30 minutes per hire. Additional job bot saves 4 to 10 minutes per job. Salary changes bot 2 to 3 minutes per change, and has improved the quality for these highly complex and sensitive transactions. And these transactions are processed by the bot in more or less 46 seconds. Next step is to expand the program within HR. Additional automation opportunities are identified for 7 bots. And as they want to scale, right, and as we want to help them scale, there needs to be a theory that is established.
Yeah, actually, this is a good one because, sorry, before you move on, Chewy, at UC Berkeley, this has become a sort of, it's actually much bigger than a proof of concept, but because it's working well within the research element of the business and the back office services, it's looking at literally scaling it opportunities across the university. So we're involved in some of those discussions. We're looking forward to working with UC Berkeley on that. They haven't quite done that yet, but because they're establishing the governance and the structure around that and the COE. But it's an exciting project in development because we have proved the concept with the team at Berkeley. Yeah, go ahead, Chewy.
All right. So the funny part, right? The video. So this is a demo, right? On the bot that we just mentioned, right? With for new hires. You're gonna see a real life, as we said, right? Not a shiny bot. This is software operating and performing tasks that a human used to perform. So in this case, right? This is using an optical character recognition solution. And so there are big PDF files coming. The bot grabs the file. Instead of going through 20 pages, it selects the 2 pages that it really needs, and then extracts the data from these 2 pages and pushes that into your OCR engine. And what the OCR engine does, basically, it's that identifies certain fields. So it's coming from 20 pages worth of document. The bot only grabs 2 certain data, sends it to OCR. OCR interprets the data, right? Extracts only the data that is needed, and then OCR sends back the information so the bot can continue the work in populating the information in the HR system. PeopleSoft, in this case, we at Casey were able to deliver this automation in less than 8 weeks, including the functional testing, including the OCR engine, including the move to production, and automating all these manual steps that the bot used to perform. So, as I mentioned, right, reads document in PDF, uses Capture Fast as a technology for OCR in a secure network location, enters data into the UCPath system, utilizing the specific template. And at the end of the day, right, the bot tells you what he or she did, right? So it'll create a report, right? And there are 2 types of reports. One that is successful entries, so new hire initiation. And when there's a business rule that had not been established, or there's an exception that has not been captured, the bot will not execute the task, but it will let you know that it didn't execute the task and will send an email explaining why. And I'm just being cautious of the time right here, but you know, the bot keeps running and processing, and you know, you can see the Excel file where the bot is reporting, and it's gonna send the file to someone that needs to understand what the bot is.
So as you can see, there's lots of screens being brought up on the screen, and it's where it's flicking between screens and backgrounds and moving information around and capturing and grabbing, screen scraping, take it off websites, etc. So it's moving information around. Not too sure, much sure how long it's got to go, Chewy, but
I'll stop it, Phil, right? I'll stop it because, you know, we created two different scenarios, the scenario where you were successful, the scenario where you failed, right? But it's basically the same set of steps that we just explained, right? And just so you know, right, so don't get scared. When your bot is running in your infrastructure, you won't see the screen. We are displaying to you the screen in a debug mode, just so you can appreciate, you know, the speed, you can appreciate the moving through the screen, but in reality, this is something that is gonna happen in the background when you deploy automations into production.
Okay. Well, I think that's actually pretty much it. I know we're close to out of time. Again, I mentioned if you have any questions, happy to. I know we're literally out of time, but I know if you've got any questions, we're happy to take them afterwards. And we can add in the UC paths and a separate case study information into that deck as well. So I don't know. With that, Kathleen, I think we're about a minute before the end. So I think
yeah. Yeah, so we had just a few questions come in through the chat room. One you did cover, which was the key challenges to implementing RPA in higher ed. Another question came in: how can a university get the budget to invest in RPA? And maybe you could just take a minute to respond to that one. And then there was one more, and then we'll go ahead and
yeah. So on the budget, I think I sort of touched on that a few minutes ago, but basically, yeah, obviously a challenge in this environment. So it's a couple of quick things. You need a proper financial business case that show, don't forget that the ROI is fairly quick turnaround. So it's really more about releasing budget than asking for a significant spend on new technology. And it's a business case that's showing the benefit in terms of releasing FTE's activity, which you can monetize or not monetize depending on your organization. So that's a very quick answer, but it's not a big technology spend.
Yeah. Thank you. And then what skill gaps are there at higher education institutes which are limiting their ability to implement RPA?
Yeah, so in terms of skill gaps, it's the same in private sector. Again, we've touched on a little bit about this discussion about IT. It's really understanding what this is. And Chewy mentioned it's more of an engineer type of mindset than an IT mindset. So it's process discipline. So it can be an extension of people who are, you know, good at Lean Six Sigma or very process type of skills, not so much a programmer in the traditional sense. Having said that, you do need a sort of logical mindset, and a programmer can easily be trained into that, but it's more about understanding how RPA operates and adapting that to your skill sets. It's absolutely there, you know, so it's more about the person and their background than it is about any particular qualifications, I would say. Chewy, have you got any additional comments on that one as we finish up?
We touched on it, right, which is change management, right? So some of the skills that are needed as you go into a larger RPA program is having the proper right management, change management skills, right? So you can really move your strategy forward. And
the skills do change. You get an RPA developer, you need a business process person who actually maps processes. You need a project management. So that there is actually we've actually got a really good chart of how you would resource a COE. It's not in here, but we can send that on some other time as well, if that would help.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think kind of related to the skill set is just the culture of higher ed versus you know, corporate. And a lot of what you talked about resonated with me from my experience at Emory. And when you said that RPA is regarded as a private sector strategy and not practical for higher ed, I remember hearing when I was at Emory that you know, they were worried about the corporatization of higher ed. And so you want to talk, when you start talking about things like RPA, you know, that kind of falls into that, you know, that area for them. But we actually managed to also implement a successful RPA solution in our grants administration process, automating our reconciliation spreadsheets. And it was very much similar to the bot that Chewy showed, where, you know, kind of gets information from a number of different systems, puts it all into one. You eliminate the, you know, manual error, and just save time, and the staff liked it because they were able to spend a little bit more time with faculty. So so great workshop, and certainly very, very, very relevant as an important topic in making shared services more efficient.
Well,
so
thanks,
thank you very much.
Thanks for the time, and if anybody has any follow-up, we're happy to do that. So enjoy the rest of the
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.